Well, howdy doody, geographers. It's time to talk about something that's really important, something that we've found is probably the most difficult skill for students to get their heads around, and that is using geography concepts. Now, middle school Australian curriculum have a set of concepts which are known as the SPICES concepts, and that's what we're going to talk about at length today. And you'll get a little opportunity to apply those concepts to something. So let's get into it. So your learning goals for today, write these down. You're going to know the SPICES geography concepts and you're going to be able to apply those concepts. If you need to pause this video at any point to write down the notes that I'm going to get you to write down, then please do so, as I might go a bit too quick for some people. Anyway, let's do it. Here we go. So you just need to write down the main definition as it comes up. Okay, so the S stands for place, and by place, the S stands for space, and by space we're talking about its location. Now, location can be absolute, so like the GPS coordinates, you know, like 100 degrees east and 20 degrees south or whatever, or it could be relative. That means it's relative or related to somewhere else. So you could say, you know, Sydney is 800 kilometers northeast of Melbourne. That's it, relative to somewhere else. So there's two different ways to talk about location. Place is the type of use of a space. It might be the different categories of how that place is used or the features. The rules. Students can find it confusing, the difference between space and place. The simple way to think about it is basically space is simply your location. Place, I would say, is the meaning that humans put onto certain spaces. The I stands for interconnection, and that's how things are connected, and that's a really broad one because that can talk about how people are connected with each other, how people are connected to the environment, to other areas of land, whatever. It's a really, really broad one. Change is basically introducing the idea of time into the concept, so that's what happens over time. The environment is about the significance of the habitat that you're in, and environments can be natural or man-made, human-made, sorry. When we say human-made, we mean human-created or human-altered, right? So like a park might not seem like it's human-made, but it's probably altered from its wild forest environment. Scale is how close or distant a consideration is. So when you think about something at the really close-up scale, like just one suburb, is probably quite different to thinking about it at the national, the international scale. And sustainability is our last S, and that is the capacity to be maintained. So something is sustainable if you can keep doing it into the future. Sustainability doesn't just apply to environmental stuff, although that's its most common use. Sustainability can be about anything. So simple example, money. If you get $10 a week in pocket money, but you spend $15 a week, then that's unsustainable. You can't keep doing that on and on. You're going to get into debt, right? If you earn $10 and you only spend $5, that's sustainable. If you earn $10, spend $10, that's sustainable as well. So just like with the Earth's resources, if we have this much clean air, but we pollute more than that, that's unsustainable. So let's look at each one in a bit more detail. So you don't actually have to take any notes down for this stuff. I'm just going to go over it in a bit more detail and follow along. So space is location, absolute or relative. So these are absolute locations, yep. So you've got 0 degrees along the equator, that's the north-south, that's longitude, and then latitude, 0 is along the prime meridian, you got east of there and west of there, and these kind of things here. This is what you use. You can type this kind of stuff into Google Maps and that will bring up absolute locations. Relative locations, on the other hand, is something relative to something else. So for example, here's Melbourne, here's Portsea. I might say Portsea is southwest of Melbourne. That's its relative location, not its absolute location. That will be like a GPS coordinate. It's relative to where Melbourne is. That is space. Place. So place is all about the different uses that we might have of spaces. So maybe there's a forest, maybe that's, and that could be forestry. We might be using that to cut down for wood. It might just be natural environment. It might be a managed national park. And here are a few examples of different types of places. Yeah. So we've got an urban environment there, which is used for commerce and shops and stuff like that. And then bottom right hand corner here, we've got something which is used for transportation, an airport. That's place. Right, the third one is interconnection, and that's how things are connected. And as I mentioned, this is like probably the broadest one that can be applied in many, many different situations. So let's take, for example, Flinders Street train station, big train station in the middle of Melbourne. How is that an example of interconnection? Well, it connects different trains together. There's a very simple way of understanding interconnection. It also connects different trams together, and there you go, you can see one there. It connects different roads together. Yeah, so this is a real transport hub. Trains, trams, and roads all interconnect at this exact intersection here. But let's just get a bit more broad than that. It also interconnects pedestrians. So you can meet someone under the clock and interconnect with another person who's come to meet you there. There's a lot of electrical cables that would be interconnected in Flinders Street Station. You can't even read the bottom of that. Appalling PowerPoint skills. It connects workers, so there might be people who work in all the different shops there, and they are interconnected. They meet other workers, they meet people from the public. Families are interconnected as well. You know, a lot of families might be taking the train in to go to a sports venue or whatever, and they might meet up with another family. And different layers of government also. Yeah, Australia's got 3 levels of government: local, state, and federal. And all the stuff going on in somewhere like Flinders Street Station would make those levels of government interconnect. So interconnect is a really, really broad one. It's thinking about connections between people and land, between, governments, environments, all good stuff. C is what happens over time, and this is all about bringing in time to the environment, to geography. So let's have a look at a real brief example of change in Melbourne. So here we go. Here's an old school map of Melbourne way back in the day. That's awesome. So there was no South Bank there. I think that's like the CBD, just like the northern, above. I'm assuming that's the Yarra, and that would be Princess Bridge, Swanston Street. Yeah, awesome. And then over time, we've got heaps more buildings, and then we've got modern Melbourne, and then what's going to happen in the future? Who knows? So that's change. Change is thinking about how something in geography changes over time. The E stands for environment, and that's all about the significance of habitat. So maybe you've got a natural habitat, and the significance of it is the biodiversity and the oxygen that it produces for the environment and how it cleans water. You might have an urban environment and how that's significant, and allowing humans to flourish, and transportation from one part to another and all the interconnections that it brings. You might have a suburb where you've got the significance of the habitat there might be that there's a bit, there's some urban development, but there's also quite a bit of nature and some parks and stuff. And then we could talk about something like what do we got there? That's a rural environment. So the significance of the habitat there, there's probably a lot more plants and animals there. Of course, it's not completely wild though, right? That's still a human managed environment. Yeah, it's probably only the wild forests in the background here that are completely natural. So we've got a completely natural one here, very, very human made, less so and less so. So when you're talking about the environment, you can talk about the plants and animals that are there and why they're significant. Maybe they're under threat, who knows. A lot of the problems that you uncover in geography these days is about how the natural environment is under threat in some way. Scale is about how close or distant a consideration is and how you can think about something differently based on its scale. So what kind of scales could we think about? The local scale, the very, very local scale, that's just one house. So how might you think about a geographical situation just at that level? Then you got the suburb level, then you got the state level, then you got the whole, then you could have the Australia level, and then you got the whole world level, yeah? And then you could even, to be wacky, have the entire solar system. You're probably not going to need that much in geography. I would say the ones that are going to be most useful would be suburb, city, state, country, and then the whole world. The way that you think about things is very different whether you think them at a close scale compared to an international scale. So for example, looking at the recent or current coronavirus outbreak, how that's managed at the suburb level might be very different to how it's managed at the national level. For example, early in some of the outbreaks, individual suburbs were locked down while the rest of the country went about its business. And then at the state level, we see that there's been state borders closing. At the international level, we're seeing that Australia's international border has closed, even though borders between other countries has remained open. So anyway. And finally, sustainability. So is what's going on in the geographical issue that you're talking about able to be maintained into the future, or is it unsustainable, meaning that it's going to come crashing down at some point? So the example I gave before is looking at your expenses versus your income. Your income needs to be as great as your expenses, otherwise that's unsustainable. Yep. Let's do a little example with our own school. So, Aiken College, the absolute location of Aiken College would be at there. The absolute location is this thing here, and its relative location is this thing here. Yep, saying it's 30 kilometres northeast of the Melbourne CBD. So it's saying what Aiken's location is relative to something else. Place. What's Aiken used for? It's an educational institution, it's a school, it's an independent school, it's used as a community of learning, it's also used as a sports facility by groups outside the school. Interconnection. How does Aiken College interconnect? It interconnects all of these human groups, so it interconnects teachers with each other, teachers with students, teachers with parents, students with parents, students with other students. But interconnection is not just about people interconnections, right? I've only given, there's only people examples on here, but you could also talk about how the students interconnect with the natural environment, and so on. Change over time. Here we go. Here's some pictures of what Aiken College looked like before the school was built. And so you see that the land use changed dramatically over time. It would have originally been a natural forest, boom, and then a farm, and then a school. And what's it going to be in the future? Hopefully still a school for a while. I need a job. The environment, the significance of the habitat. We're pretty lucky in our school with the natural habitat that we've got. There's all kinds of stuff. We've got the built environment, obviously. We've got some revegetation areas where we're trying to improve. For example, along Brodie's Creek, we're trying to get rid of all the weeds and replant native plants which would have been there before it was a farm. So there's a lot of interplay there between the natural environment and the built environment and the human managed environment. Obviously, the entirety of the Aiken College campus is a human managed environment. Scale, what are the different scales that we can think about when you think about our school? You could think about starting right at the bottom there, that's the smallest scale, B6, that's one room. VCE1, that's a whole building. Brookhill, that's a whole group of buildings, that's 3 buildings. The ring road, that's everything inside that circular road. And then the school property, that's everything inside the ring road, so most of the buildings, plus everything outside of it, the barn, the sports fields, the gym, stuff like that. So there are some different scales you might think about. If you think about student movement within the classroom called B6 might be very different to how you think about student movement in the entire school property. In B6, maybe during lesson, students all have to stay seated or be in small groups, whereas student movement around the school property, the school's rules would be like, keep students safe and off the road, keep them away from the fences, keep students roughly in areas where they hang out with people of the same age as them, and so on. Finally, sustainability is the capacity to be maintained. So what kind of things do we have in Aiken College that might be relevant to sustainability? So firstly, financial sustainability. How much does the government pay the school to run it? How much do we charge how much do we charge families to send their students there, and compare that to the costs paying us, all of us teachers, and all the other costs that the school's got. What about sustainability when it relates to water use? How much rainfall do we collect? Is that clean enough for us to use? Do we collect enough water from our roofs to use, or do we need to use the town water supply? We can also look at sustainability of student numbers, how many new students are enrolling versus how many are leaving the school. And then obviously we could look at all the sustainability features that Aiken has with the environment, like as mentioned, revegetation and improving the wetlands and stuff like that. And that's them all. SPICES: space, place, interconnection, change, environment, scale, sustainability. Soon enough you'll be able to rattle them off by heart, just as I was able to then. Got a little activity for you. It's very simple. It's very similar to what we just did. So you're going to complete a SPICES analysis on a location of your choice. So you could look at, you can't do the school because we've already done that example, but you could look at your house, you could look at the park down the road, you could look at Great Ocean Road, Tasmania, whatever you want. So you've got to write one or two long sentences about space, place, interconnection, change, environment, scale, sustainability. So for example, if I did in MCG, the space, I might find out on Google Maps what its actual location is, yeah, so like the GPS coordinate. I might also give it a relative, you could choose to give it a relative location. The MCG is 40 kilometers southeast of my house, whatever. You might talk about the place, how the MCG is a place for concerts and sports, sporting competitions, and a place for diseases to spread, lol. You could talk about the interconnection, how it brings lots of people together with each other, but also with the sporting heroes that they're watching. You could talk about the change, so the MCG would have, originally been part of the natural environment, and how did the First Nations Australians that were Wurundjeri use that area, and then slowly it became an MCG and got bigger and bigger and bigger. What's it going to be like in the future? Is it going to get even bigger? You can think about that. The environment, what's the environment of the MCG? It's basically all human-made, so but then there's also the big grassy area in the middle, so you could talk about the grass, you could talk about the animals. If you've ever seen a game late at night, you'll notice that there's a whole heap of birds that circle around the lights, so that's all part of the natural and built environment as well. Sustainability: is the MCG sustainable? Can it continue on into the future? So, does it make enough money from selling tickets to keep up with its costs? Has coronavirus harmed its sustainability because they don't have lots of fans going to see games anymore, or not as many? And finally, scale. Think about how the people who own the MCG's got to think about scale. They've got to think about the experience of the person in one seat, and then in one block of seats, and then in that whole row, and then in the entire MCG, and then MCG's relationship to the rest of Melbourne, to the rest of Victoria, to the rest of Australia, to the rest of the world. Lots to go on there. So that is your activity, and I know that you're going to absolutely cane it, and we've got a little video for you. So this is from GeoSkills. It's called SPICES, goes for about 4 minutes. Check it out. Which way am I pointing? Here we go.
Welcome to another video on geography skills. Today we're going to look at another acronym in order to remember the 7 key geographic concepts. That is SPICES, or SPICES, or SPICES. Actually, it doesn't matter as long as you remember it. These concepts are space, place, interconnection, change, environment, scale, and sustainability. That may seem like a lot to take in, so let's just take one term at a time and go through them. Firstly, space. When we're thinking about space, we're thinking about the spatial distribution of an area. Is that area significant? How is that area organised or managed? A helpful example here might be the BBC program Grand Designs with Kevin MacLeod. Kevin loves to go on about how buildings use light and what kind of a space they've created. This can be both absolute, such as the library is a space, or relative. I might have a certain couch at home where I turn on the light of an evening and that's my relaxing reading space. A lot of the time when we're thinking through space, we first need to get a handle of what is the purpose of that space. Which brings us to place. Many students get these two terms confused. I like to say that place is much more conceptual. It's what you think about an area. Because of this, places can give meaning and can help you to identify with something. They can be both very local or global. They can also mean different things to different people. An attic, for example, might be a cozy, adventurous place or a scary place depending on who's looking at it. At the end of the day, it's what you think about a place that defines it. So places can have importance for some people. They can provide others with a sense of identity or a sense of belonging where they feel they connect with others. Which brings us to interconnection. They say that nothing happens in a vacuum. Which is right if you think about it. If something happened, it wouldn't be a vacuum. But this phrase basically means nothing happens in isolation, but everything is connected in some way or another. So when thinking through this geographic term, we want to ask questions like, what ways are places connected to each other? How significant are those connections? How did those connections occur? And why are they important? Getting a handle of that is crucial when we look at the next geographic concept, which is change. Change is a way of explaining geographic phenomena and processes. These can be both natural, such as a river causing a canyon, or human-induced, such as climate change. They can be both predictable and unpredictable, can occur gradually, such as natural erosion, or quickly, such as an earthquake. While longer, predictable processes are easy to discuss, sometimes change can occur in a completely random fashion. And change can have significantly different impacts based on when it occurs, how it occurs, and where it occurs. Environment. When discussing the environment, we're largely talking about how humans relate to our environment. This question is often referred to as interrelating. The environment supports us by giving us food, raw materials. It recycles many of our waste products, such as carbon dioxide, and provides habitats for animals who live in complex ecosystems. The environment is a product of a whole range of different processes, from geomorphic to biotic, geological, and human-induced. Humans relate with the environment in very different ways. It depends on how you perceive it, which leads to people adapting to it in different ways, and using it in different ways. These different perceptions of the environment depend on cultural differences. They could also be based on the level of technology we possess, population density, the type of economy a country might have, and their values and worldview. Scale. The concept of scale is examining geographic phenomena from a number of different spatial levels. These can be personal, local, regional, national, international, or global. Let's use drought as an example. From a personal level, we might look at a farmer who's struggling to feed his cows. At a local level, all of the farmers might have to travel far and wide trying to provide as much grass as possible for their herds. At a regional level, they might organise for trucks to bring in feed, hay from other areas to feed their cows when the grass runs out. At a national level, perhaps this might have an impact on live exports. Perhaps we will have a bit of a trade deficit as a country based on our inability to provide enough cattle. At an international level, we might look at the overuse of beef as a foodstuff, which has created imbalance in different ecosystems. From a global point of view, climate change might cause a greater infertility of soil, and we may need to think through how efficient our food production processes are. Which leads us to sustainability. Sustainability is us living in such a way that we can guarantee the environment is still there for future generations. This can range from governments giving funds for renewable energy startups to the home where we work on recycling as many materials as possible. An example of this can be found on Grand Designs, where people have developed a type of home called an earthship. This is a home where they try to recycle everything needed to build the property and make the property as sustainable as possible. So that's Spices. Any questions? Comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Very simple reflection activity for you all today. It's the headline one, and hopefully some of you know about this. Basically, pretend you're writing a newspaper headline for today's lesson. Just one snappy little sentence. What would you name this lesson? And once you've done that, written down the definitions of all of the so you got the date and the title of the lesson. You got the learning goals. You've got a description of each of the concepts. You've done your little activity where you've done a spices analysis on a place of your choice, and you've done that reflection activity. Take a photo of all of that, upload it, and you are done, my friends. Keep it real.